SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.
The Anti-Corruption Working Group has just concluded its meetings, and of course that was followed by the Anti-Corruption Ministerial meeting. Of course, taking into cognizance all of that was discussed. That's all happening ahead of the G20 Leaders Summit. And of course, with just a few days to go until that Leaders Summit happening in November, at the ministerial meeting, a number of discussions were held over the 4 key priorities that have been looked over by the Anti-Corruption Working Group. Now, of course, it features a number of speakers too today. Wrapping up this session, Minister of Public Service Administration, Inkosi Mzamo Buthelezi, Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development, Mamoloko Kubai, as well as the chair of the Anti-Working Group and SIU head, and that's Advocate Andy Mutibi. And they all join me this afternoon. Good afternoon to you, and thank you so much for your time. Minister Buthelezi, I want to start with you because, of course, your department really was at the forefront of these discussions. I mean, it's been a long journey since South Africa got the G20 presidency, but we're talking about a very serious topic here, and that's anti-corruption. Speak to us about just some of the deliberations that happened at the ministerial briefing, particularly when we look at that these are supposed to then be deliberated further at the Leaders Summit. What discussions have you had?
Thank you very much. I think what is very important for us is the fact that our presidency as South Africa, as we know, we've got 3 of our priorities, which is solidarity, equality and sustainability. But as the Anti-Corruption Working Group, therefore, we've got our 4 priorities, which first and foremost speaks to strengthening the public sector, because we've come to understand as countries of the world that corruption is not only stealing from the poor, undermining our service delivery and the progress, but it also undermines our hard-gained what we call democracies. Therefore, South Africa has decided, the Anti-Corruption Working Group, to prioritize 4 issues, which is the first one that I've mentioned. Secondly, we wanted to strengthen our measures and endeavors to recover assets that have been acquired through wrong means. Also, we wanted to strengthen the participation by the public, private, and the civil society and academia, because we have all come to an understanding that government alone, yes, we must take the lead as government, but without the involvement of the entire society, academia, and the private sector, we will never win the battle. And lastly, which is very important, and I believe Minister will actually talk more about it, the whistleblower protection, because you know that we cannot simply know what is happening in every corner, but there are those individuals who are courageous enough to expose corrupt activities, to expose all those people that are involved. Therefore, it's important that they don't get victimized. We protect them as government. That was also one area that we focused on. And what is very also important is that all the G20 countries agreed on our priorities. All of them, as we have said, beside the fact that we didn't have the ministerial declaration, but all what was contained there have been agreed by all parties in the chair's statement. And this work we're going to take forward even to the other presidencies that will take over. Thank you.
And I want to, talk about those declarations, and I'll pose that question to Advocate Mutibi. But for now, let's hand over the mic to Minister of Justice and Constitutional Development. Ma'am, a very good afternoon to you too. Of course, one of the key focus areas was really on whistleblower protection by the Anti-Corruption Working Group. It's something that is on the forefront of every South African's mind. I mean, we see it in the many commissions that are currently before us. And the concern, of course, is with the laws that we have that are meant to protect whistleblowers, where are we going wrong?
Thank you very much. I think the first issue around whistleblowing is that we have agreed that there is a need for us to review legislation. We're currently at the final stages as the lead department in the legislation that deals with that. We should be able to go to cabinet before the end of the year, beginning of the year next year. That's the first thing. But we had to go into various areas. You'd remember the advisory panel of the President NACEC made quite substantive recommendation around issues of whistleblowing. But we had a working session as the department led and calls various stakeholders together with the World Bank to look at what other countries are doing. We've had quite a lot of external engagements, visiting countries, look at the models, and that's why we can safely say we are actually at that road. There are various mechanisms currently in place, but they are proving not to be sufficient, and I'll speak to that. Sometimes when you have a whistleblower, you rely on them to cooperate with you. So if somebody is testifying, and that's why you have whistleblowers and then you have witness protection. When somebody is already testifying, you can put them on witness protection. Sometimes they don't agree. And you are left with them sitting there vulnerable, because sometimes they're saying, and to take somebody out, because you've got to uproot them out of their community, out of their daily life, to be able to give them a new identity somewhere. And sometimes people, when you explain those details, they feel, it's not safe. But again, others might think that, no, I'm not at that risk currently when you engage them, only to find later, few days or year down or months down, they are killed. They would have felt that they are not yet. So it's those things, one, on advocacy with our own communities, protection. We've been able even to engage with the banks. One of the issues that we are putting as the department in terms of various institutions is to say, for example, where, let's say, a public servant has become a whistleblower, and then they are taken through DC and they are fired. What we are saying to the banks, let's work together where we identify them as whistleblowers, so that you don't take their cars, you don't take their houses, where they become homeless, so that we can protect them until their case is finished. And it's those mechanisms that you are working on. It's work in progress, but quite substantive issues that we are dealing with. But again, to deter those who are stealing from the state, that's why we are talking about asset recovery. Proceeds of crime must come back to the state, and we redirect the money to utilize to fight crime. So that's why where they are not yet criminal activities, we take over the assets, freeze them either through SIU or AFU, to be able to get them to be stripped, so that we deter people from taking that from the state.
And the concern, of course, and I will speak about it in a moment, is that you do see those assets being recovered, but we don't necessarily see the arrests. We don't necessarily see the prosecution that happens following that. But I want you to pause that thought, Minister, and then we'll come back to you in terms of when are we really going to start seeing that level of accountability, particularly as you are talking about protecting witnesses. But Advocate Mutibi, as the chair of the Anti-Corruption Working Group, how concerned are you that not all of the G20 nations are in support of the declarations that the Anti-Corruption Working Group has tabled? And we see, of course, and we hear of the agreements from various countries. But the declarations, I mean, a lot of South Africans have been hearing about these declarations that will be taken to the Leaders Summit, where then they will hopefully be adopted. So what are we saying when we're saying there was no general consensus across the board?
Right, no, thank you for this opportunity. In fact, I would put it the other way around. All parties supported the document that was meant to be a ministerial declaration, but one member. So because G20 works on consensus, if one member does not agree with certain concepts in the document, then of course it is said that we do not have consensus. And on that basis, we then had to issue a chair statement. And if you read that chair statement, because it will be publicized, read through it and see how strong that statement is. In fact, it actually sort of worked out in our favor, so that we could actually state our mind, as it were, in terms of all these anti-corruption initiatives. So the statement actually covers all that should have been in the ministerial declaration and more. So we are really quite happy about that outcome. And the differences really it related to some of the concepts like sustainable development goals, gender issues and so on, which are very important to us as the presidency. So we couldn't just jettison those concepts simply because one member does not agree with that. So we are pleased that we maintain them in the chair statement, and all of the countries that were here, in fact, pronounced that the chair statement is actually so acceptable to everyone. And in that chair statement, you'll see that all the deliverables have been accepted.
I would imagine that is going to be released, Advocate, but speak to us then about what that means in terms of implementation. Of course, not all countries are obligated to implement some of the declarations or recommendations, but what does that mean, particularly for South Africa, when we look at the work that you, as the SIU, has already been doing, but the frustration that comes with the work that you do that does not necessarily translate to those convictions that everyone is talking about. A lot of people obviously wanting to see just some of the recommendations that have been made in previous commissions also being finalized.
No, thanks. So in terms of the outcome of the G20, there's a commitment of all the parties, of all the member states, to ensure that we implement the outcomes. And those documents that have been agreed to will serve as reference documents to all the member states. And there is a working plan that was agreed in Brazil last year. That document is from 2025 to 2027, and most of the outcomes would also inform the action plan. And when next we meet, we will then be taking stock of how far we are in implementing those outcomes. So we are really pleased that there is that level of commitment from all the parties. Look, in terms of the implementation of the outcomes and recommendations of the commissions, you might have had the opportunity to have sight of the latest report that the President submitted to Parliament relating to implementation of the Zondo State Capture Commission report.
Yeah.
There is significant traction in terms of implementing the recommendations. So we are really pleased. Of course, we realize that there's more that we still need to do. If you read there's been significant recoveries in terms of assets. There are some prosecutions that are underway. There's been some arrests relating to ESCOM and other SOEs. Yeah. So the public message, and we do understand that there's more that they would like to see in terms of prosecution, but we're working closely with NPA to ensure that those prosecutions would follow.
Minister Kubai, I want to talk about just some of, because I posed a question and I want to afford you the right to respond to that. When we look at, again, just whistleblowers, I want to speak about the whistleblower-related laws, and one in particular that was addressed during these working groups, the Protection Disclosure Act, PDA 26 of 2000. In your response, perhaps also speak to about how you can incorporate these laws, because I know that 3 were part of the discussions, how you can incorporate these laws but also apply it to the system, that justice must be both swift and it must also be visible, particularly in just some of the discussions that we've been having about where you see some of the work that is being done, but there's still so much still lagging.
Yeah. I think, let me start with that and I'll come to this, because I think we need to correct factually the achievement, and I'm not so sure why media keeps on ignoring the reports. I've released a report, I've released a statement. Out of the 128 recommendations on the Zondo Commission, only one area is not being decided not to be prosecuted. All are. There are 58 areas where there's no recommendation. NPA has decided to do charges against. and they are currently in various stages. I think we've had 3 already in prosecution that have been successful, and many more before court.
Yeah,
so that statistics is available.
Yeah, and that's why I said why the perception of justice that is needed to be both swift and visible.
It is visible, but I don't know why it's being ignored. If you look at the Nugget report, commission report, all those recommendations have been implemented, and the turnaround in SARS, you can see it. PIC as well, the reforms there are informed by that commission. Because sometimes there's this issue that commissions are happening, there's no, but reports are presented. Advocate Mtibi talks about the latest report to Parliament, which is public in the websites of government and all that. In terms of the reforms, IDEC, it's a result, establishment of IDEC is a result of the Zondo Commission report recommendation. You'd see the reform in terms of SSA, it's as a result of the Zondo recommendation. Public service reform, state-owned entities reform, Public Service Commission in terms of its role and the current legislation, it's a result of the Zondo Commission. So there are many things I can count. Now, on the whistleblower work that is being done, we're looking at one act that is going to deal with all the issues so that we can be able to protect. And that's why the issue for me is to look at the review of the current legislation. One is that it's not there. There isn't any act currently in the country that speaks to whistleblowing. The act that currently exists speaks to witness protection. Yeah. So these are 2 different things. So the witness protection is when you are already having a case before court and a person is a state witness in a case. And that's why the development of a whistleblowing, understanding that whistleblowing, for example, where you have a case that you are still investigating, the matter is not yet in court, but you are recognizing that Mamoloko can be at risk. And therefore you coin Mamoloko a whistleblower. So my DG was saying to me, the legal team was saying, Minister, in terms of law, currently there's nothing called whistleblower in South Africa. And that's why we need to develop it. And that's the legislation I'm talking about, that towards the end of this year, early beginning of next year, we will implement. And obviously, because we're looking at all these investigations, you would understand that various investigations, and over time, when we evolve as a country, things that we are dealing with at SIU today were not there. So we look at that environment. That's why the review of SIU legislation, to empower it and strengthen it, and also sort out their own financial stability to be able to give us the output that we are seeing. And I'm happy that people are acknowledging a state-owned entity that is doing a fantastic job to fight crime and corruption in the country, because the work that they do, it's enabled by government and they are supported by government. And that's why we keep on reviewing what is it that we need to do. Even before we can do the legislation, we've given them the mandate, go and explore how best can you protect whistleblowers in your work. And that work is done. They are establishing a full unit. We've asked them to assist even in some of the commissions that we are doing to advise them what can be done. So we're already leveraging on what we have even before legislation is done.
All right, thank you so much, Minister, for that. Minister Buthelezi, let me bring you in. I mean, we've obviously heard that a lot of work is being done, and we have to perhaps also take credit and congratulate you in the work that is being done. But Minister Buthelezi, when we talk about promoting transparency and accountability, it's easier said than done, particularly when you look at just what has been happening to the whistleblowers, whether they are whistleblowers or not, in terms of characteristics of law. So promoting accountability, promoting transparency is not possible for many people, because we've seen some South Africans now living abroad because, you know, they've come out bravely to declare that this is happening within my institution. I want to talk about the public sector per se, in terms of how you are restoring, you know, that trust in the system, so that people do come forward, and not only do they come forward, but also can be protected, even though some of our laws are limited in some aspects.
I think from the public sector perspective, There's a lot that government is doing, in particular the PSA, which is the department that I'm leading, where we are actually bringing the issue of professionalization, where we want to bring professionalism in the public sector, want to bring ethics, accountability on all that, because we have learned that, because firstly, let me say that there is a perception out there which may not necessarily be true. Public service has been a very honorable work. Everybody, most of us, when we grew up, wanted to be public servants because it had attracted ethical people, leaders of integrity and the like. So it's just now that we've seen that getting eroded. Hence, we are bringing forth the issue of professionalization. But also, there's something that I want to touch to, which you mentioned earlier on, to say we want to see justice being exercised speedily. Yeah. But we must also understand that justice must be applied in a just way. Like, for example, when we say we see a lot of asset recovery but less of prosecution, I wouldn't say that is the case per se. It's just that even you as the media, the way you report things, when we are recovering, all of you descend to that particular place, but afterwards don't follow those cases through. So you have a duty, therefore, to follow such through and make sure that the public is aware of what is happening. So government is doing a lot from the public sector, as I'm saying. We issue directives whereby we encourage public servants to act ethically and to do things in the right way and be transparent and be accountable. Because if public servants themselves are not held to account, that is where we see a lot of leakages within the system. But also, we must understand that even the civic society, the ordinary citizens of the country, should also take their own responsibility, because when we deal about issues of crime, corruption and all that, it does not start with the minister or the DG and it ends there. There are members of the society who are involved in that. That is why we are saying we are encouraging even the public to come on board. We are encouraging academia to come on board, to a point that government is not seen as a place that is very fertile for looting. We must begin now to attract young people that comes into the system, people that has ethics, people that will actually embody the principles of Patupile, understanding that when they are given an opportunity to serve, that is their highest calling, and they must do that diligently and with honor.
Minister, I'm going to ask you to hold that mic. We are wrapping up our discussion now. Okay. So just your final thoughts. And particularly, I think the thread that's been coming through here is how do you then balance just the legal complexities, yes, and that visibility that and that public trust that so many of our citizens desperately need, particularly during this time, as you wrap your discussions. Let's start with you.
I will say public trust can only be regained when all of us as South Africans become patriot citizens of our country. And we must understand what we mean by saying the state or government, because we've got a tendency of thinking of government as the officials and the ministers, not ourselves. Therefore, renege from being active citizens. By active citizenry, we mean where you take a responsibility as the citizen. If you go to a particular service station, you don't come there with a drink and say, Mutibi, here's a drink, can you just please put me forward in the queue? That is corruption. You are actually bribing an official to do you some favors. If South Africans can begin to take ownership and be responsible and they do that which is right, then we'll never see corruption. It shouldn't be defined from the prism of those that are in charge, ignoring completely those that are corruptors.
SABC, host broadcaster of the G20 South Africa 2025.